Remember, the mantra in Washington, D.C. was either NATO is out of area or out of business. In other words, we have to run around and find things for our NATO European allies to do that serve American interests, or NATO is over. Then there was no willingness to let NATO go. The Europeans, not all of them, but large numbers of them, wanted to keep us in Europe, so they essentially prostituted themselves to us to keep us there. And at the same time, everything in Washington is mortgaged to vanity. Do we need to be in Europe? Didn't matter in 1995 whether we needed to be there or not. People wanted to stay, so they saw this as part of the larger global imperial structure that had emerged after the Second World War. I don't know how to fix this, except to point out that we're running out of money. We're not going to have the wherewithal. We can't afford it.
Well, what does this mean though? Because this view of Europe in the security strategy, this the view of the European leaders especially as being well, very undemocratic and by sidelining political opposition, media. Um, it's how much of this is Trump? Because I get the impression there's some growing contempt, if not for Europe, at least for the leaders. And do you see this as now? Do you interpret this as a signal of the U.S. Being willing to pull a bit away from NATO, or
I think that we would just as soon retire NATO as a structure. I think that's something that is in the back of President Trump's mind, has been for a long time. I mean, what is the rationale, the raison d'etre for NATO? And you've heard all these cute remarks about keep the Soviets out and the Germans down and all that nonsense. Now, having failed to make that case effectively, they start the war in Ukraine and try to say, oh, well, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. Well, if you haven't figured it out yet, the Russians are not coming. The Russians don't want to come. They have effectively gotten control of what is most important to them. They would like to consolidate this and bring the fighting to an end. And the Europeans in particular are saying, well, we want this to continue. Most of the people on the Hill are happy to let it continue in the United States. They see it as a moneymaker for them. What a catastrophe, but that's the way people look at it. That's why I was saying about the African warlord is more concerned about his people than the people in Washington are about us. So now I'm not saying that about President Trump per se. I think President Trump sees it differently. I think he sees it's time for Europe to be on its own. The Europeans have to come to terms with each other and with Russia. You know, we need to stop playing God in Europe. I think he feels that way, and I happen to agree with him. The same thing is true in Asia. Remember that wherever we go, we're the outsider. We interfere and we distort the dynamics that would otherwise shape the region. Our first major disaster was intervening during the First World War. And that was based purely on monetary interest. The bankers in London and New York City went to President Wilson and said, look, we're in a lot of trouble. The Germans are winning. If you don't intervene in this war, Germany and Austria-Hungary will win the war, and we'll be broke. So we have 318,000 casualties and 110 days of fighting to prevent Germany and Austria-Hungary from winning the war. Britain and France won the war. Communism was established in Russia because Russia fell apart. Great job. Brilliant job, President Wilson. What a wonderful outcome for Western civilization. And it's been downhill ever since. So I think a lot of us have felt, and I certainly did for a long time, it's time to leave and let the Germans and the French and the Poles and everyone else, regardless of how difficult it may be, sort it out and figure out where they want to go and what they want to do. Now, I think if we get out of the way and our troops are removed, I think you'll have a much higher probability of seeing a clean sweep politically in Europe. Because, and we were talking about this before the show began, you said, well, the Europeans this, and I said, maybe they're globalist elites that are running the countries right now, but not the population. I do talk to Germans and Austrians pretty frequently, and I get a lot of information from the Poles and connections in Russia and Ukraine. People want this business over with. They're not interested in a war at all. It's the globalist elites that are in power. And you're sitting there and you're saying, how do you get rid of these people? Because the elections, the parliamentary procedures, everything seems to be rigged to prevent any fundamental change in the direction of the country. Well, if we get out of the way, I think that will change. Now, will that be violent or political? Will it be achieved at the ballot box? I don't know, Glenn. But the Europeans must regain control of their governments. They must rid themselves of the people who are at the top. If they don't do it, they will continue to sink into this abyss of poverty and despair, which is the road they're on right now.
Well, that's the main common denominator, though, of Starmer, Merz, and Macron is they're all immensely unpopular. They don't really focus much on domestic politics, spend most of the time, being obsessed about Ukraine and defeating Russia. So they don't have much support, of course, among their public.
Well, the Germans need to come to terms with an important reality. Here is this man, Matz, who used to work for BlackRock. BlackRock, Larry Fink, the former CEO, was in Kiev talking to his friend Zelensky about buying up and getting control of vast quantities of Ukrainian farmland, which Mr. Zelensky was only too happy to sell. And this is the background for Merz as Prime Minister or as Chancellor of Germany. I mean, that's frightening. I mean, this person is fundamentally flawed and corrupt, in my judgment, based on his experience in that environment with people like Fink. I mean, everyone in Washington will tell you privately, if Larry Fink says it, don't believe it. I mean, now he's running the WEF, the World Economic Forum. Think about it. These people are poison. They have to be removed. The Europeans are going to have to do it. In this country, we're eventually going to have to do something similar. It's going to take us a little longer. We're a little bit behind you, but we're facing the same kind of problem.